Agentic AI. So this really came to our attention at the end of last year, and I think that's consistent with what was going on across the sector as well. So, there's a variety of stats out there, but this is a graph of academic research and public interest. Mentions that earning calls, I gather, went up 17x in Q4 last year, and it's where a lot of the VC money is going now. And there are various quotes out there around Agentic is going to eclipse the entire SaaS market, and there's some big predictions. And the implications for the workforce and the future, I think Simon's going to cover in great depth in a few minutes, but this is something that's now cropping up my LinkedIn feed. You find that once you pay a bit of attention, I think the algorithm keeps giving you more, and you'd be forgiven for thinking it's the only thing the sector's looking at, which I think is not true, but certainly there is a lot of interest. A few words on the difference between Gen AI and Agentic AI, and again, Simon will say some more on this, but I quite like this distinction. I borrowed this one from Microsoft. There's a couple of things that we borrowed, but Gen AI being creating novel content, and Agentic AI being all about achieving an outcome. And the Agentic concept, the Agentic model is agents that have a persona, and they've been given a role, they're trying to achieve a goal, they have autonomous action, and they can make decisions. And that's really a very significant extension from what we're all doing now with Gen AI, creating content, video, comparing documents and so forth. It's really about an autonomous workforce, and it brings some additional risk and control considerations. So under Gen AI, it's hallucination, it's bias, it's safe AI. Well, and then you layer on, well, actually, if you're going to let these agents actually do stuff and write to your clients and make lending decisions and underwrite things, then what are the risk and ethical considerations that go with that, and who's accountable, how do you control it? So this is really already complex subject becomes more complex. So if you look across the industry, there are lots of potential use cases. So this is from a City report that was published in January, and I think the team there did an amazing job of really unpacking Agentic AI across the FS sector and pinpointing where the opportunities may sit, and they're front to back, and they're in all verticals. And it's things like portfolio selection, and it's customer care teams, and it's compliance and risk, underwriting, auditing, fraud, and the rest. So I'm not going to, again, try and explain all of that, but it's really sector-wide, front to back, and it's this extension of what if you could take the brain, Gen AI, and give it autonomy, and extend, and so it can act as an extension of your human workforce. And here's an example. So this is what it might look like for the buy side. So you have self-learning AI agents, and those agents are playing the role of portfolio management, of risk management, operations, research, and they're working together. So you actually have a synthetic team that's doing the business. That's quite an interesting, for me, there's a bit of a head spin when we started looking into this at the end of last year, and you really have to pause and think about that, I think. It'll become a little bit more real in a moment when we show you some demos. And the reason we're getting so excited about this at NextWave is really the opportunity for agents plus process. So for a while, last year when we were talking to clients and looking at the research, I used to use the phrase widget AI quite a lot, which is rather unkind. It was my labelling of you're using a bit of Gen AI to create some marketing copy or something like that. But the real opportunity is when you can embed the capabilities of AI in the end-to-end workflow for the enterprise. So it's really about process, and there's various, again, quotes floating around BPRE being the new prompt engineering, and it's all about process optimization. And it's not far off, right? If you've got agents that can trigger corporate workflows and run them end-to-end, or those corporate workflows can trigger agents to do the next step in an end-to-end process, then you're really moving the needle and creating end-to-end autonomy. So, and this is kind of what we do in the NextWave solutioning team, which is why we're really excited to see what shapes out in 2025 and bringing AI really properly together with that process integration.
Well, one thing before I get there is it's important that the architectures for scaling what I'm going to show for an enterprise setting are really important. So we can do things like I just showed you. It doesn't really affect the the architecture of a company. But when you want to scale, what I'm going to show you, when you want to scale it up, there are a lot of important things that you need to get right. And this diagram I'm not going to go through now, but underneath each of these boxes, there's a lot of new companies that are innovating the whole time that can be harnessed. But it's very important to keep the guardrail, the controls layer at the top there when you're thinking about scaling this, because in regulated environments, this can be very dangerous. But what I would say is the most important thing is down the bottom of this line here, whereby, because this is so transformational, as I said, you're changing the nature of the workforce, it's really important that you put in place a proper strategy from the start, rather than rush in and do some technical experiments, which might be interesting but don't actually move the needle. Also, there's a way of implementing this that I think is going to be most successful to accelerate ahead of your competitors. And we believe that running business prototypes in the context of a strategy that you create in advance is probably the best way forward. So, I'm going to show you this. This is the, you can tell me if you agree, but I believe this is probably one of the most advanced deployments of an agentic team within an operational environment anywhere in the world. And it comes from, it's in France, and so you can see these names, they're a bit French. And it's an example where 18 months ago, a company wanted to create a completely new insurance business. It wasn't in the insurance industry, and it thought it would create an additional insurance business for its customers. So it knew nothing about insurance, had no knowledge, no domain expertise whatsoever. And they tried to hire insurance people, but they were really expensive, they didn't want to work where they were, and they couldn't, some people joined, but they weren't the right fit. So this is a real business problem. I've got this great idea to launch a business, but I can't get any staff. So what they said is, could we do this with agents? And on the left-hand side, you can see the human agents that were employed, because the company had its own call centre and customer service centre already. And some of those people were assigned to this space. And then we created a team of agents which communicated with each other over Slack, because that was the tool the company used. They could use Teams, doesn't really matter. And it allowed the humans also to interact with the agents. But you'll notice here, there's an actuary agent, there's a couple of customer services, a CRM, this process. Two important things I'd like to highlight. One is Hélène, who is the facilitator. She's the person who makes sure the agents do their job. So they're sort of like you with your teams. Imagine you have your own teams, you have meetings with your teams, you have problems to solve. Your teams have good people, average people, hopefully not many bad people, and on a regular basis you come together to solve problems together. So what I'm going to show you is not a workflow, here's a workflow we want to optimize, but an unstructured environment whereby knowledgeable workers, in this case synthetic workers, collaborate to solve problems and make decisions. That's what we do as humans day in, day out. Now the other interesting thing I'd like to show you is that Charlene there, you'll notice that is a digital twin of the real Charlene. Because after a while, what we found is that the human workers who were interacting with the agents said, this is actually quite good for me. I don't see this as a threat. It's helping me achieve my objectives. And while I like interacting with the agents, I don't want to do it all the time. So could you clone me such that I can participate in their discussions without having to be there? Agents. Yeah, just do it. So what I'd like you to do, if I run the tape, is just imagine, I'm going to show you a very specific example. But I'd just like you to consider the meetings that you have with your team members on a regular basis, the ones that you participate in, where you have to come up with a solution. It's a problem, you get together, you've got to come up with a solution, and then you might have a sequence of other meetings afterwards to progress that. I'm just going to show you one example of how this works, and then I'd like you to think about how that could apply in any type of situation. But first of all, I'm going to show you the results. So this is not a technical experiment or an R&D test. For the last 18 months, that team has been working, and it's been delivering these results for that company that has never ever sold an insurance policy in the past. So firstly, they didn't have to hire 10 insurance people. That saved them €1 million in one go. Their productivity gain, when they did some experiments comparing the Agentic team to human teams, in terms of categorizing some of the issues that were coming through and some of the ticket handling, tended to be a lot better. But look at this figure here. Underwriting profit is the bottom line. And at one stage, they gave the Agentic team the task. They said, could you come up with new ways to increase underwriting profit? That was the task. The team are not constrained by the biases and experiences that we humans have. And they came up with extraordinary, quite creative ideas, some of which were semi-illegal, I have to say. But once they were put in check, they came up with an approach that none of the human insurance people had ever thought of. And they've increased underwriting profit compared to the industry benchmarks quite considerably. The customers are happier, they get better responses quicker, etc. And as I mentioned, employees are not grateful for this. So much so that the CEO of the company has said, I'm not going to hire many more humans for the overall company, but I'm going to pay my humans more to thank them for working with the agents. So they're happy about that. We've taken, in the interest of time, I've taken a very simple example of essentially what you've seen there is a swarm of agents coming together to solve a problem very fast, just as we do in human team meetings, where we bring together our team of experts to address the problem. And they've done that in about 25 seconds, and they've come up with a good result, and it's gone off to the customer. So that's one example, of course, in terms of innovating around increasing the profitability, or how do we increase operational efficiency, etc. The same principles apply. And I had a meeting this morning with a large financial institution, and they said, oh yeah, we don't have call centers like that, we've got everything worked out, we don't need that. I said, well, that's not what I'm showing here. I'm showing the ability of agents that would cost you $100,000 each to, if you hire humans, to undertake complex problem solving and make decisions. So where could you apply that across your business? And when we discussed that, of course, we said, okay, about in HR. Well, in HR, we do all these different things. We came up with about 40 different applications where a team of agents, if you had them, could supplement and complement the human team. And you don't have to pay them so much. So I hope that's useful and stimulating, and looking forward to discussing it further. So thanks very much.
If I could ask EJ and Sarah to come up as well, and we'll just give you a microphone each, and we'll help ourselves. I think we can move these chairs around a bit as well, we don't really need to speak. Right, so what's the with us? Interesting? Provoking? Great, okay. So we're going to broaden it out a little bit. There are a few questions I've got here that are not just agentic. I think there's a broader perspective on the panel, and I really want to hear from Sarah, I want to hear from EJ, and we'll take some questions from the audience as well once we get through a few. So stay with us, and let's see what the panel have got to say. So, firstly, EJ, I'll come to you first. I confess it's the second time I've had a conversation today, so we recorded the podcast at 9 o'clock this morning, so I know some of the answers. But where do you think we are with AI adoption in the industry at the moment, and what's your current focus?
It's extremely early. I think what we saw is incredible, but far from the ability to be operationalized at scale with a high level of resilience and certainty, particularly when it comes to regulated industries. That said, pushing the frontier is always great. However, when you're delivering a service to a customer with an expected outcome to a stakeholder, a shareholder, a regulator, what it takes to do what we've seen amongst other things, and especially if you juxtapose that to a large complex organization that operates in 10, 20, 50, 80 countries and jurisdictions around the world, we've got some kind of relation. So I think we also need to take a step back and realize that artificial intelligence has been with us for quite a long time, depending on how you define it. In some cases, over a decade. I was not laughing at you, but at the slide that you had, I think it was number 10, where it was in terms of agentic types of use cases, and had things like, well, I was laughing because 10 years ago, that same exact slide you could have put in RPA. 2 years ago, you could have said AI. Today is, agentic, and tomorrow it's going to say quantum. So it's the same stuff, right? You're solving the same problems. You're just using, a set of responsible enabling technologies to get a better outcome and a better service. So it's a continuous journey, and we're going to be on it for a long time.
So direction of travel, a bit of reality check.
That's me. By the way, anything I say represents my personal opinions. Not that of my either recent past or soon-to-be future.
So Ren, should we come to you?
Yeah, no, I'm going to try to frame my response in terms of the industry research return of the top 20 banks and give you snippets and previews of the conversations. So I think there's a few themes, but I agree with EJ in terms of we're very much at the early stages. But we're becoming more strategic in terms of adoption. We've kind of moved away from the point-to-point proof of concepts, the experimentation. We're getting more strategic, and that's good because you've got the boards engaged, you've got investors engaged, and so it has to become more strategic, which I think is a good thing. I think all the focus over the last couple of years has been on productivity. I think that's moved in terms of real return on investment and ultimately growth. How do you use AI, Gen AI to drive growth? So I think that's positive as well. I think we moved away from the arms race where use cases where everyone's competing in terms of the number of use cases. I think that I was at a conference once and someone claimed they had 700 AI use cases, not in production, but maybe in the POC stage, where people are focused on high impact use cases. Typically, you're only going to be able to deliver about 50 to 20 use cases in a year. So I think that's positive. I think it's positive focus on governance and risk management. And that's going to be hard. Right? Both are hard. Both are going to be key limiting factors to how fast we can go in terms of true adoption. We talked about Agentic AI, and I think that is the topic of discussion this year. How do you think about re-engineering workflows? That's going to give you the step change in profitability, step change in the organization construct that everyone's looking for. And then lastly, everyone's going to be focused on return on investment. As a quarterly result, you're going to get analysts asking this question over and over again. And I think there's only 3 banks that have put dollar amount to return on investment. JP Morgan, DBS, and BNP. So I think they're the key themes that we're hearing from our conversations. So I think we've made progress, and there's real engagement from the top. But I think we'll talk later in terms of what really needs to happen for scale to happen.
So you've already had the stage, but you're painting the future vision. But I also know that you're realistic about where the sector is at. And as the member we spoke about, it's just because nobody's really talking about this yet. But stage of adoption?
Yes, so before Christmas, no one would answer, take my calls. After Christmas, they took my calls. And now, they're saying they want to move forward and do prototypes. So these are very big financial institutions, particularly from the insurance side, and with your help, hopefully the banks as well. So I think strategically, people, once you explain it sort of in the way that I've done, then the strategy people and the operational people and the leaders sort of understand what you're talking about. It's not a It's not process automation, although that it can help with that as well. It's something different. It's a step change. It's a change in the business model, the capability of the organisation. So people are starting to realise that, and they're starting to buy the story. If we don't move, what happens when our competitors move? So, notwithstanding all the challenges of trying to get large incumbent organisations to change, there seems to be an appetite just starting to do something. And certainly what I've shown today, the vast 99.9% of people have never seen that. They don't even know it exists. They read reports by academics that have done sort of very simple tests with big companies about the next type of augmentation on personal productivity, but nothing like this. So I think it's grabbing attention, and I think we will start to see, and it builds on what Cyril was just saying, we'll start to see investors and boards saying, well, what's your plan for this? They started to do that with Gen AI and AI. I think it's not now because they don't know about it, but quite soon, maybe in the next 6-9 months, we'll start to get that pressure coming on companies. And then actually have to pay.
I mean, that's a really good point, because as EJ said, we've seen technology before. And as an industry over the last 15 years, we haven't fully delivered on the promise. I think the difference now is AI is making big changes across our industries. And now boards, investors, shareholders, and analysts are engaged to put the pressure on the banks to change, to move to that AI-driven operating model and solve some of the legacy structures that we all have lived and breathed over the last 15 years.
I think there's a top-down drive that we haven't seen before. The AI adoption is twice the speed of the internet adoption. So there's very big institutions, probably most of them, one I can think of in particular, who, after they did a massive integration project, the one simple priority that was put out to the exec was going like our strategy, and they're working on that and they're building things. So it's an unusual level of impetus, I think, from the exec. Sorry, Jay, you're going to jump in.
I understand, and it's natural that we're talking about this, but we have to remember fundamentally, like, this is an enabler to achieve an outcome. So when you're in front of the door, exactly. I have validation from the very top. When you're in front of the board, and yes, the question is about AI, but it's about, have you improved your NPS? Is the mortgage, our mortgage complaints coming into our contact centers going to be coming down? I'd like to, double and half, in terms of my release velocity from a software engineering perspective. These are great ways to get there, but oftentimes we confuse this as the thing. This isn't the thing. The thing is doing your services better, serving your customers better, delivering a mortgage, providing an insurance product. And when you choose the right stack, the right applications, the right partners that sit on top of the right data, and you achieve product market fit, then this is a great way to get there. I just want us to be cautious and understand that this is no more, no less than a very, very advanced enabler. My last point is, we saw that great video in the beginning around the robot doing martial arts. Does that mean that robot's a great wholesale credit underwriter? Probably not. I'm looking for a great wholesale credit underwriter, not a robot that can kick my butt. So that's kind of where I think we need to be.
So just to add that, from one grade to another grade, Teresa at JP Morgan, she's CEO, she heads up everything AI at JP Morgan, and she said exactly the same. She said, we shouldn't be talking about AI as strategy, it's a business strategy. And AI is a key business enabler. And that's why she wants to put the ownership with the CEOs of the business for them to determine how AI can help enable their business, right? So I think EJ's point is well made.
So within the context of business strategy and the practical constraints of a regulated industry, what's the best AI use case that you've seen so far? What have you seen go wrong? Let's start with EJ.
Okay. I think there is legitimate task level productivity gains that can be benchmarked and found clearly in the engineering and the data science space. Why is that? okay? Beyond the hype, when you actually look at the benchmarks, okay, and the measurement standards and thresholds of what makes a great software engineer, for whatever reason, the Valley, that of the Silicon one, they are chasing each other, and when you look at the league tables, and things as crazy as what they would call, not my words, humanity's last exam, look it up, they are benchmarking the performance of these models against tasks that are likely to be in the software engineering domain, okay? So you can start building use cases with confidence in that space because those particular models are designed for those particular outcomes and tasks. The gap is, however, from a go-to-market and product market fit perspective, a lot of industries do a heck of a lot more than just software engineering. So, does the model large or small, or the agent, are they a great contact center individual? Are they great, in terms of credit underwriting? Are they great in terms of onboarding? And this is where the gap is, and why it's a lot harder to realize those benefits, because it's harder to build out those standards and thresholds. The gentleman who asked before, and how do you know, how do you measure it? Well, the good news is if you're in the software engineering and data science space, the benchmarks and the standards are there. If you're trying to apply this stuff to other tasks and other roles, it's a heck of a lot harder, and that's why adoption is really lagging, because you're having to figure out along the way.
Thank you. And Sven, you've been talking to, I'm going to say the top 20 banks, I don't know whether you've got around them all yet, but best applications, best, the impact use cases that you're coming across?
Yeah, I'm going to be more thematic. I think in terms of, when I think about use cases, there's three things I look at in terms of really moving the needle. One, the people looking to re-engineer workflows, that's really difficult, but that's going to really make the difference, right? We've all lived with bad processes. Secondly, are they looking to enhance the client engagement channels? Again, taking it outside of the bag. And then thirdly, are they starting to rethink how to do business, new products and services? So with that lens, I'd kind of pick out maybe 4 examples. One, CDA, Commonwealth Bank of Australia. They've, I think, first public use case around Agentic in terms of how they deal with the 15,000 payment disputes they receive on a daily basis. Secondly, Morgan Stanley, I think they were early adopters in terms of using AI within their marquee wealth management business for clients, to help clients. I think thirdly, UBS, they kind of launched an M&A ideas generator in terms of thinking about how do we use AI to help with prospecting, how do we stakeholder analysis, how do we build that forward-looking pipeline. And then the fourth example is JP Morgan, the leader of the field in terms of how they're just rethinking the front office, right? And they're probably leading the line in terms of how do we truly rethink the front office? How do we replace humans with AI? How do we do most of our hedging using AI? So I picked those examples.
Yeah, and I had an interesting conversation today, so I did a recording with Bank of America this afternoon, and I know that they've taken out 7,000 technology patents, and 1,100 of them are in AI and machine learning. And I asked Andrew to describe what the applications are, and they have a retail chatbot that's working across the retail customer base. They've extended it to the commercial banking SME market. Did you build it? and they've got natural language chatbot across the trading desks now. And I thought that was quite unusual because I'm not hearing that a lot. So maybe, I don't know where they are on the ARE 10 we're talking about this morning. But
Worse than us.
there you go.
Well, and actually, it's not to be, it's wonderful if an organization can produce the intellectual property and the intellectual capital, which often manifests itself in patents. And that's wonderful. But you have to be able to apply it in the context of your business services to kind of create value. And that's really what that means, that missing link is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just building on what EJ was saying, that most of the tools to enable agentic AI tend to be for the developers, the software people. It's helping software people to create more software to create digital solutions. But what I try to show there is where you're helping business managers who don't need any software people to solve commercial problems. In both of those examples, there's no software people, no IT department involved. There's a little bit because you've got to connect to the CRM system. And the results you saw there were very strong commercial results, profitability, NPS, etc. So I think we're going to, I think where this market is going is not just enabling the IT department to be much better and more efficient and so on, but it's also going to help the commercial departments to be the same.
Thank you. We'll do a couple more from my list, take a few from the floor as well. But I want to talk about risks a bit. So we touched on this earlier. Given the knowledge risks of Gen AI, hallucination bias, etc., and then you layer on the autonomy and what's your agent actually going to do, what's it going to write to your client or send out the door. How do we see that coming under governance and control? And we were talking, EJ and I, this morning about make a checker and a human in the loop and how many humans you need and what tools you use. It's a tricky one. So I don't know who wants to go first on that, but how are we going to control all this?
Oh gosh. Well, I was going to pass to you, but I'll give some thoughts. EJ.
And there's different ways to answer this question, because governance is a big topic. Breaks down into probably three parts of it, and I will answer one. Number one, what is that governance model in an organization? So, for example, typically AI projects will start in IT, and then a lot of firms have now got a centralized team looking after AI. And then I think it will evolve into where the business have ownership and that central team will be expanded. So I think number one is governance. How do you govern it? And I think continuing to kind of the business heads really playing a key part and having a firm-wide committee, maybe aligned to this committee's other committees or its own standing committee. And you're kind of seeing that happen for the rest of the JP Morgan. There's real ownership within the businesses. Second, I think the question is, well, we can see emergence of obviously the chief AI officers and where do they sit, which part of the organization they're involved into. And then the third piece, and I'll probably not answer the question fully, is you can almost imagine this massive racing matrix of like, there's a lot of people touch on AI, but actually what their responsibilities and what their accountabilities is really very clear. So we've all seen this with the different lines of defence and in terms of what's happening post-crisis in terms of different incidents. I think this is going to be on steroids in terms of real accountability, ownership. And actually I think we're probably going to have to wait for a bit of a blow-up before people start taking decisions as well.
Let's make a few baseline assumptions that over time, a given organization, their enterprise risk framework doesn't have to be in the bank, but the risk framework in the organization designs a fit-for-purpose set of frameworks to kind of understand the risk check. Let's also assume that the organization has invested the right time in workforce education because, at some level or another, there must be, in my opinion, human oversight over a lot of this so that ultimately this type of stuff is used both ethically and effectively in check, okay? Even if both of those things are true, and that's gonna take a lot of time and work, okay? In my opinion, the tooling does not yet exist, okay, to perform have real-time control and real-time monitoring over the velocity of the expected volume of a true agentic ecosystem. It's one thing to do point in time, okay? And that's hard. And if you speak to people in the model risk management division of financial organizations, on average it could take 4 to 6 months to do evaluation of a simple model. But now here comes this stuff, okay? And now you have, hybrid workforces, human and AI. You might have, more and more autonomy. You might have multiple organizations across the supply chain that have an agentic ecosystem that kind of transcend your corporate borders. And things can go really wrong really fast with some of these feedback loops. I mean, we saw a awesome and elegant, but I think we would agree simple solution in Slack where there was a feedback loop taking place. Now put that on steroids in rocket fuel where it's taking place in the capital markets scenario where bank A, bank B, and bank C are trading high-risk derivatives, and you can see where things can spiral real fast, okay? So I think in order for this to happen, okay, it's going to require a level of tooling, a level of regulation that allows for real-time assessment and monitoring so that things don't spiral too fast in that feedback loop. That said, there's a lot of lower risk use cases that don't necessarily need that level of rigor and discipline, but you still can't just do assessment, point in time once every 6 months. Something will go wrong with your customers.
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of innovation in AI risk management, of course, to try and address that. So that becomes another software category, of course. Maybe you create bots that do risk control as well. But yeah, it's an arms race, essentially, which is worrying.
Yeah, I'm sort of excited and terrified about that extrapolation of the derivatives trading.
Well, it's not to give everyone a nightmare tonight, but we haven't even talked about open source, right? So then you think about the barriers to entry coming down, and we're talking about prudent risk management in an enterprise. Well, let's make no mistake, open source is lowering the barriers to entry so that bad actors out there, if they find the right point of vulnerability, they can start injecting kind of bad stuff like into the system, into that feedback loop, and create unintended consequences, for the intended party. So you also have to be resilient against these vulnerabilities because open source is going to open up a lot of other factors.
Thank you. So I'm going to come back for closing comments in a few minutes, but let's open it up to the floor. Everyone's still with us and managed to sort of unspin your head and got the question. Now's the time. And the back? Shall I walk around with the microphone? I'll make it easy.
Question for you, Jay, actually. From your experiences in complex global organisations, how's this affecting the changing relationship with partners and suppliers? Where do organisations leave the most out of big tech? Where does their need to step up and step up again?
All of the above, but that said, to be more precise, it's a heck of a lot easier to have fewer partners that can do most things than a whole lot of partners that can do fewer. And so it's likely that when you select your ecosystem of partners, you're going to want to have those that can be by your side across the majority of your operational footprint and work with you collaboratively to kind of develop a roadmap. That said, even the largest of the large, have gaps in their capabilities, so you need to fill in those blanks. In terms of kind of niche capabilities. But also make no mistake, at the end of the day, the business and the organization owns the risk, owns the outcome, and woe unto those who don't have the right talent within their own organization to kind of lead and drive this, because if you outsource that, over a period of time, if you don't have that talent, internally, you're creating unhealthy dependencies on third parties that put your operations and your customers at risk. So, in my opinion, fewer, better, operated scale.
It's sort of just following on from what you were just talking about, but I think there's loads of companies that are developing AI agents at the moment, and I'm wondering how you protect against outsourcing your entire workforce to a big tech firm. I think there will always be a supply demand on people who can develop these amazing, effective agents. So how will a company protect its IP and make sure that you're not just outsourcing whatever 20 to 30% of your workforce to a company like NVIDIA who has the power to outsource and produce millions of these agents?
Because you build it on your own? I don't think you need the staff. I mean, that's the whole, and I agree wholeheartedly. Like, you don't need to outsource your digital workforce in the future. The tooling will exist within your own context data, within your own environments, within your own kind of secure infrastructure that you can do this stuff, and you don't need to rely on third parties. Again, because the barriers to entry are coming down. Now, if you want to play at the very edge of the frontier, to have the model equivalent of, you know, a 10 PhD for whatever task that might require, yeah, then you're going to have to rely upon that frontier lab to do the latest thing. But I think you would agree that for most tasks in most organizations, you don't need the latest model, okay? You need maybe something that's 1 or 2 generations old in your own environment, operating at scale, and you don't need to outsource that to a third party. Not sure what your thoughts are. I agree with that.
But I think it's a valid question, I think, because if a lot of the banks think about the hyperscalers that are all rolling out agentic platforms, and you go with Microsoft or Microsoft agents, you're suddenly facing the risk of, you know, the number of agents we're talking about being provided by Microsoft. And a lot of those hyperscalers are already thinking about how they revise their charging model to kind of take advantage of that. So that's a big risk.
Open source.
And I would just add that not only are the component architectures becoming more accessible, but of course the AI will help you build it. Obviously, the founder of one of the AI companies in our portfolio at the start of the week, and talking about how they're developing their product, and he said that their dev is only 15% hands-on cutting code. Right? So the AI is giving them an 80% productivity gain. So they are burning through producing product. That's one of the use cases we didn't talk about, but really interesting. There was another question here.
So AI is changing industries and things are moving very fast. The only thing that it doesn't move fast is big organizations. So where do we see the future, like 1,000+ organizations having 30% synthetic workforce, or 10 people that organization going to and having 99% synthetic workforce and making first group irrelevant? So what's the future?
So I think it's a good question. It goes back to what we talked about, the new AI-driven entrepreneur. If you take the European band, most European bands anywhere between 60 to 80, 90,000 people. A lot of that in the back office. We all know there's massive pressure from the street in terms of rethinking what the training is, rethinking the economics. So I think there's going to be huge pressure, and again, noting the risks we talked about in terms of how do you leverage AI to build a new operator?
Yeah, I mean, just an estimate, I discussed this recently for knowledge-intensive industries like banks and insurance companies, we think that about 15 or 20% of the staff are doing manual stuff, replaced doing that knowledge. Then you've got up to 50%, so another 20 to 30%, whose jobs will be radically changed, because they will have to learn how to manage not only humans, but also lots of agents, and create agents, and design them, and so on. So you've got about half the organisation, I think, that has to either 50-20% replace, the rest will have to learn new jobs, and maybe the rest of the next 5 years can carry on what they're doing. That's a massive change. So, and then of course people always are starting to talk about the $1 billion company, which is, maybe that's a sort of another type of vision for the future. But I think just the big institutions that exist today, there's some big change on the horizon.
Question as a father of an 18 years old boy that started university in 1 year time, and I'm wondering how the job space will be in 5 to 10 years time. So the question is, which kind of transformation and skills of the future you expect the workforce will need in such an environment?
As a father of a 19-year-old who's in university right now, I'm advising my son in California to learn and take coursework around ethics, responsibility, and applying that, in a sense, related to decision science, because I'm going through that very same thing with my son. And so it's really around that nexus of ethics, artificial intelligence, data science, and decision science. He could just never learn coding, and that would be fine. So.
Yeah, I think 2 things. Totally agree with that in terms of the ethics framework, the trust framework, the risk management. It's not even started. And then secondly, if you look at the makeup of the bank, let's take the front office. The front office is going to fundamentally change. We're going to have very few traders. We're going to have quants. We're going to have computer engineers. We're going to have data people in the front office. going to be similar to like what we've seen with algo trading kind of struggles. So I think fundamentally the makeup of how the workforce of the bank is going to change.
It's such a great question and a challenge for all of us. So it was on my list, so I'm really glad you asked that one. We'll take two more from the audience and I'm just going to come back for to close it out with the panel. So we've already got one at the front, we've got one at the back, hands going up.
So I'm just thinking about regulatory space. You know, what should we be doing as financial services teams and businesses in terms of actually really pushing the agenda with regard to agentic AI in the regulatory environment?
Let's assume you have the luxury of having to deal with one regulator. You know, again, because the complexity gets non-linear, the more markets you have to deliver production-grade services. So my experience and my recommendations is that you have to stay very close to your regulatory partners, both internally and externally. There is nothing worse than surprising your regulator, whether it's a product announcement or anything like that. In my opinion, that requires close collaboration and appropriate levels of interaction and feedback around kind of realistic types of regulations that not only balance risk but drive responsible innovation. Speaking here of my adopted home, you know, things like PRASS 123, right? A great position of leadership, you know, that the PRA did in terms of advanced model management, okay? That was done with a lot of input from industry, but a lot of work to be done. You could also look at examples like Singapore with MAS, you know, and their feed standards and principles. Singapore very much leading in a future-focused way, you know, in terms of setting what the bars are, but also at the same time not being prescriptive and being technology neutral to allow the market to deliver best-in-class solutions. So be proactive, engage, understand, you know, this nexus between product market fit and risk management. Don't surprise your regulator.
Yeah, there's an opportunity maybe to innovate here as well in that relationship, because if you just take the insurance industry, it's similar in banking where there's big gaps between what the market needs and banks are able to deliver. But insurance is something called the protection gap. So that's the gap between the amount of cover that people need to be financially secure and what they actually have. And it's about $6 trillion today. So that covers healthcare, cyber, natural catastrophe, and some other things. So you've got a, if you like, non-consumption of insurance that it should be consumed. That size, 6 trillion, is about, it's not much less than the total size of the insurance market today. Now, who picks up the slack when people are ill, when the cyber attack, etc.? It's the government, ultimately. So there is a discussion that had to be had to say we want to innovate to serve our customers better. We now have capacity to do things that we just didn't have before, because all our problems in closing those gaps are to do with our capacity and our ability to find customers engaged and come with new solutions. So there could be a discussion to be had, say, that's what we want to do. It helps society, it helps government as well. Let's talk about the type of regulation we need to enable that. And the regulator is not thinking like that, they're thinking about how the world exists today, but helping them to see that opportunity that benefits everybody might be a different type of discussion.
So just to add very quickly, so I agree 100% with DJ in terms of proactive, open, transparent communication with the regulator. We invited Colin Payne from the FCA innovation team, who's very keen to attend, but unfortunately had a clash. But you know, with fintech, sandbox, with this, they encourage people to use AI and have that transparent communication. So I think probably not as MAS obviously is the model, but I think in the UK we do have a open regulator in terms of innovation. And yeah, I'm just echoing what Isra said in terms of that closeness, communication, transparency.
I would say, you know, perhaps the best way to treat it is a regulatory partnership and recognise the regulators going on the same journey. So there's an agentic company that NextWave's working with who have sold their agentic software to a number of the big four auditors, and they're in the forensic accounting space. They've also just sold to the regulator. So everyone's going on the same journey. Anyway, one more from the audience. Okay. Charles got there first.
So EJ, as one hand to another, firstly, I'm very pleased that my daughter's studying applied ethics. The question, so Tony and I were at SureTech last week, as we said. There were 2 sessions where people were queuing out of the door. The second was silent, because he followed Adina Eckstein and the head of Google Europe. Adina Eckstein is the COO of America. So my question is, when a company like Lemonade is aiming in the short, medium term for $4 million profit per employee and has been using and embedding AI for the last 10 years, and many insurance companies have teams who are walking around cities with pieces of paper, how does that cascade? What's your view on the journey over the next 3 to 5 years?
I completely agree that the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed, and I, as you know, did not come up with that. It was an oft-used term, but you're going to see a massive divergence, even within regulated industries, even within sectors where, because of a combination of forward-thinking leadership, organizations that have been on a drive for years to improve their data architecture, that have great partners in the ecosystem who can provide to them like access to capabilities, you're going to see divergence like that, where some folks are still walking around with proverbial slide rules and working on Excel, and others are going to have, a spanning control ratio of like 1 human, to 3 humans to 10 agents, all working in like a hybrid workforce. Both of those things can be true at the same time. So to me, like the ingredients for success are, do you have the right strategy? Do you know the services that you want to deliver to your customer? Are you putting everything at, your talent and your workforce to deliver that? So I think you're going to see more and more tangible examples of that. And candidly, that's just good for business so long as it's done responsibly.
Great question, great answer. Okay, so I'm just going to bring to the close of the panel, and we've got some food's just arrived, and the perhaps most important part of this event is networking and chat afterwards. So let's just get some closing thoughts. The takeaway question, actually, for the audience, as a takeaway, what would you say are the 3 things you can do differently tomorrow morning to get on the front foot with AI? So let's keep it really practical. Start with Serena this one.
I think 3 things. Be strategic, because it's so easy working about chasing the tactical wins. Strategic is not. So be strategic, because that's contributing to the future. I think secondly, be bold. Be bold in the ambition. We've got a chance to reinvent our industry. We had lots of structural issues. We've never managed to really reinvent the industry. I think this is the opportunity. So be bold. Think about the 3 horizons of innovation. 1, you protect, transform, and then actually moonshot. So be bold. And then thirdly, I think, and I always management, it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be really bumpy. So perseverance is key.
Yeah, so I think one thing could be to think for the team that you run, what could you do if you had 3 times the size of that team? And just have a think about it in the bath or on bikes or whatever you do. What could you achieve if you had 3 times the operational capacity? And then start to talk to your colleagues or your bosses or your subordinates about that. I think that's one interesting thing to do. And then secondly, I would say, I'm going to leave it at that. Let's just do that one thing.
Do 1 thing 3 times.
Literally tomorrow, pick up the phone and call your learning and development partner in your organization and ask them why we don't have AI literacy programs available to your entire workforce, because they're there, they're free. And so a lot of that is all of the research says that an educated, engaged workforce will use this stuff ethically and effectively, and is key to driving beneficial outcomes. 1. 2, do not forget the foundations of great product market fit, especially design thinking and solution design. It doesn't matter if you have access to, an agentic system with the, brain equivalent of 10 PhDs, if you can't connect it to the service and the customer in a way where the customer is going to adopt the thing, okay? Raising your hand and saying, hey, we've got a great data science workbench, like, does you no good unless it's connected to the customer. So you've got to have design thinking in service design. And third and final, overused, but it's true, data is the lifeblood of this. Is your data house in order? But if it's not, that's okay. Everyone's on the journey. You still got to start somewhere. So you really need to make sure that you're driving excellence within your data architecture.
Thank you. Okay, so, well, that's fantastic. So I've seen a lot of panel presentations. For me, there was such a lot there, so I hope everyone got something from that. We're going to draw the content part of the evening to a close. I must thank our panel for open, transparent input, sharing their insights.